Dale says the truth's like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It'll defend itself. Laura says that's exactly what the Bible says to do. Search the scriptures. Yeah, I mean, literally, Paul praised the Bereans for like searching the scriptures every day after they left their service, quote unquote service, and making sure everything that was said was true.
If you find yourself asking somebody in the IFB world a question or challenging them on something, and if their first response is, well, that's what my pastor says, and I've heard that so many times, they're in trouble. They've given up their spiritual their spiritual side of them to a person. That's not what the Bible teaches about it. I'm responsible for my spiritualness. Now, I'm not saying that the church is bad or the church is, not helpful. Without churches, we wouldn't be feeding the poor. Without religion, we wouldn't be, feeding, the homeless. And, there's hospitals, St. Jude's, a lot of these. So religion isn't bad when it has its rightful place in a person's life. Mm-hmm. It's not church, then me, and then God up here for my spiritualness. It's reverse. The church is supposed to be supporting my relationship with God, not dictating my relationship with God. And that's where the IFB gets it wrong. They want to dictate my relationship with God, and then they'll turn around and when it comes to salvation, point to the Catholics and say, well, how is the Pope dictating someone's salvation? Well, you're doing the same thing after salvation.
You're
that
dictating
they're
their
doing
sanctification. It just switches into this role. Yeah, it's a really it's like you said, it's diving into what benefits the church or the ministry and letting that guide the theology and what benefits the person running it. You mentioned the heavy emphasis on think of sacrificial giving, and it goes back to that ministry first philosophy, right? Like putting everything you have on the line for the sake of the ministry, even if that comes to the point of forsaking your ministry of your family, your personal walk with God, like any kind of personal theological study. I pulled up another clip. I feel like Jamie on the Joe Rogan podcast. I'm like thinking of all these clips, but there's a clip from John MacArthur. I've definitely got some different views than MacArthur on quite a few topics. And I think I've maybe mentioned him on the show a couple times, but there was he addressed the story of the widow who gave her last two mites or last two coins to the church. And I heard that, I don't know about you, I heard that every missions conference, like be like the widow, and like you'd have the long altar call. They literally would have like, the buckets with like, put your last coins in and all this stuff. And anyway, he did a sermon basically about the topic of the widow's last two mites and explained that the part of the verse you don't ever read is when it says after that, like, that's what fueled Christ to say, like, I'm going to basically tear down and rebuild the church. So I wanted to just play a quick snippet from that, from MacArthur here. Let me share that.
The prosperity gospel is more morally reprehensible than a Las Vegas casino because it masquerades as religion. They take your money in Las Vegas, but you expect it. Because it's run by the mafia. You don't expect the people that represent God to do the same thing. And when Jesus saw the widow put her last mite into the temple offering, he said, this temple is going to come down. Not one stone will be left on another. I don't know what you have been taught about that story of the widow giving her last 2 cents. That was not an example of Christian giving. God doesn't expect you to give your last 2 cents and go home and die. That's what happens to a widow who is suckered by a religion of works. She was trying to buy with her last 2 cents her way into the kingdom because that's what she'd been taught. And Jesus says any system that sucks people down to the place where they have nothing left in a false hope is coming down. And it did.
Anyway, so yeah, I thought that was, so that clip came to mind when you were talking about that. But yeah, I had a question come in. Susan just said, what would you suggest to do with your religion and faith after leaving the IFB? What did you do to search or maybe even throwing it away? I think we touched on this a little bit, but if you want to start with that, like what your kind of journey was. Did you step away temporarily? Like, What was kind of your process?
Oh boy, that's a whole backstory. So I can remember vividly. So I got married very soon right out of college. Um, and you really, if you're in the IFP world, we know that a lot of times you don't know the other person. It could be oil and water and you just don't know it yet. Um, I came out to California to be assistant pastor at an independent fundamental Baptist church. I did that because I looked and I said, what are the two furthest spots from Chesterton, Indiana that I can go to? And it's the tip of Florida and Southern California. I joke about that, but it's sort of true. And so I came out to California to get away from Fairhaven, get away from what they were doing in the vicious cycle that everybody was in. And for about a year, I was a pastor, and I was like, okay, man, nobody's going to be like Fairhaven. There's not going to be a pastor that does the things that Fairhaven do. I was promised that. He even said when he was, hiring me, yeah, I'm just not like Fairhaven. They're way over the top. But even though he'd go back to their preaching conferences and want to be, all involved in that. So about a year, 9 months into it, he started really acting like Roger Vogelin, just calling, me out. It was all if something went wrong, it was always my fault. And I just remember thinking there's got to be more to life than this. There's got to be more to life than this. Unfortunately, it didn't work out between my wife and I. We went our separate ways, part my fault, part her fault. And I remember thinking after that, I want nothing to do with religion. I threw it out, threw the baby out with the bathwater, just get rid of it all, want nothing to do with it. I'm done. And I remember it was like a switch. It just snapped with me because for 21 years, I was in a pressure cooker. 21 years, it was just like all of these emotions that you learn to compartmentalize, you learn to bottle up, you learn, and this is a topic for a different time, but how a man is supposed to be and act in, and not let your emotions out. And I remember it just snapped with me. And I was like, I don't care what it costs. I'm out. I'm done. I'm through with this. There's got to be more to life than this. Even if I'm going to hell, it's worth it at this point. And I remember coming to that point in that conclusion and, made some bad decisions and, that ended up, costing me. And I just remember about a couple of years later saying, you know what, religion did give me some stability. Religion does have some structure, some things that are good that comes of it. Like they can support your walk with God. They can support your, need for good friends and a good base of friends. The problem, and I think it's gonna ever be a search and find, and it's always going to be something that we're trying to evolve, which I think is the beauty of it too, is okay, what did I do? I took it down to the studs. My religion, I questioned everything, got rid of it all, and now it's starting to be like, okay, now how do I build that back up? What do I believe about the church? What do I believe about, salvation? What do I believe about this and this and this and this? And the beauty of it is now I get to be the one that builds that back up, not someone else telling me how I'm supposed to act and what I'm supposed to think and how I'm supposed to interpret. So I would say if anybody that is leaving the independent fundamental Baptist movement, and everybody does it at a varying degree. Some people just take one step out of it. Some people are running as far from it as they possibly can. So I think there's differing degrees of separation from the IFB. Those that are going to stay closer to it probably are going to, not question everything. They're still going to have their beliefs in a lot of things. They just maybe didn't like the way the operation side of things was going on. The ones that want nothing to do with it and are throwing religion out, I still believe in God. I still believe that, God put us all here for a purpose. I still have the fundamental beliefs, but a lot of it has changed. And it goes back to kind of the previous conversation we had about, the Ermlers and Connors of the world, where now we're open-minded. Now it's like, okay, well, what can I, let me read, this far left book on, the subject, and let me read the far right, and I get to come to my own decision of
Right.
where I'm going to land on this. So I would always, advise people, the further you get away from it, you're going to have a better perspective, and you get to be the one that chooses what you take and what you leave there. And you're going to be the one that, gets to define how you're going to view, your spiritual walk with God and your religion. Because spirituality and religion are two different things. But the IFB movement combines them and makes you think that they cannot be inseparable, because now they control you. And a lot of
Right.
other churches do the same thing, not just the IFBs, but a lot of other churches do the same thing. I have my spiritualness. It is given to me by the grace of God. My walk with God is my responsibility. Religion is to help support that, not be the one that is between me and God. And
Mm.
I think we get that very confused. And as you're going through life, you get to take what you want, and then you get to leave what you want with it. But I would definitely say, don't let your bad experience with the church taint or prevent you from finding out the truth.
Mm.
Because I think a lot of times we've had such a bad experience with it, we're just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and there's some good that we're throwing out with it too. And
Mm.
that's what I believe we ought to keep with us, is the good that comes from it. A lot of the moral, aspects of what religion teaches.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I went on a similar thing. I mentioned earlier, kicking at the foundation a little bit, like, and trying to just see what stands up and what holds up. And you know, I mean, for me too, I think, getting into an environment, like changing environment's huge. Obviously, if you're in a place that's crushing the spiritual side of you and is, just steamrolling you every chance it gets, I think to get into a healthier environment where that's not the case is huge. And that was what I did. I mentioned Josh Ermler, like going to Ambassador Baptist Church at the time, their Fresno church now, but going there and, getting an environment where people had conversations about theology because that's what they were thinking about, or about, the relationship with Christ because that's what they were thinking about, and not because it was what they had to talk about to sound a certain way. And it wasn't, when I first went, it was like weird because it wasn't people weren't turning around after church. Like the way that church used to be for me growing up was people would turn around after a service, kind of like, it's over, and like, let's talk about a football game that's coming on. And that's fine. I'm not saying anything wrong about football games, but like going to Ambassador, like, and people would turn around and be like, wow, I was just thinking throughout the week about this. And it wasn't coming from this, like, oh, I memorized this much of my Bible, so like I'm the most impressive Christian. It came from this place of like, that's what they were just meditating on all the time. It's like thinking about that. And so for me, seeing that environment was really impactful. And it made me, as someone who was like really like trying to figure out for the first time like what my faith was, it was like, oh, I want that. Like, I want that connection and that kind of actual passion about what I believe. Because up to that point, it was, if I memorize this, from the time you're a little kid, if I memorize this, I'll get a piece of candy, to if I memorize this, the youth pastor will be happy, to if I memorize this, I'll graduate Bible college, to if I memorize this, people will think I'm a great speaker. Like, everything is always this, like, if I do this, I earn this kind of mentality. And so being in Fresno was the first time that I actually like tried to study for myself, what do I believe in, why?